Hi boys and girls, I'm excited to be back with you today as we come to day 4 of God's great creation. We have seen through Genesis as God has created different things, and we are now at the day when He creates the sun and the stars. But we are not going to talk about the sun and the stars today because we talked about God creating light on the first day. We talked about God creating plants that use light to be able to create food for themselves on the third day. And so we are going to let you think and wonder about how great God is that He can create light without the sun and the stars, that He can grow plants without the sun and the light that comes from it. We are going to let you wonder and be in awe of God's power to do all of that. And we are going to move on to day 5 because day 5 is where the action really picks up. If you remember last week, we talked about God creating all of the plants that are around us, the plants in the rainforest and in your yard. And today we are going to talk about the birds that are flying in the air and the fish that are swimming in the seas. Because on day 5, God created everything that flies in the air and everything that swims in the sea. And so as we get ready to go and explore the amazing diversity of what God has put in our sky and in our waters, we're going to have some fun. We're going to use this net first. Let's go look together at what God created on day 5. Well, you don't always catch something when you take a net out and you toss it in the water. I don't know if you've been fishing, but you don't always get anything. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to try out here on the lake again with an actual fishing pole to see if we can get anything to show you what it looks like when fish swim in God's great world. Well, we did get something, but it isn't much. Let's see if we can get him off the hook and take a closer look. Now look at this. It's not a huge fish, but you can see all the different colors that he has on it. The speckles, you can see the top fin up here. See, every fish just like this, God has made different in His great big world. It is so exciting that we can look at fish like this. We can feel them, we can see the tails and see the colors that move and know that God has created a fish just like this for this lake behind us. And that God has made so many more fish that go into the ocean, that go into the rivers, that go into all the lakes and streams around. It's exciting to see these things. God loved creating fish. And one of the most exciting parts of that is that then when Jesus got into His ministry, Jesus started to tell so many stories about fish. He met His first disciples out while they were fishing and told them, "Put down your nets and follow me and I'll make you fishers of men." See, Jesus loved fishing. He loved talking about fishing, and we love seeing what God has created. Let's go take another look at some other things that God has done. Well, that was pretty exciting seeing that fish get caught. I know I had fun catching that fish and just being out there fishing in God's creation. It's a lot of fun. And what's also fun is when we think about the fish that are in the water, we know that different bodies of water have different fish, right? The fish in the ocean are completely different than the fish that I caught. The fish that are in rivers and streams are completely different than what we see in the ocean. Even when you go to the ocean, the fish in the warm water are completely different than the fish in the cold water. And we look at other fish that move thousands of miles through the ocean just to find warmer and colder water. It's incredible to me to see how God's creation moves around like that. And it reminds us, Ecclesiastes 3 says that there is a time for everything and a time for every action under heaven. And so we are reminded that God's great creation is moving around in exactly the way that He wants it at the time that He wants it. And that is cool for us to see. Another way that we see things change at different times is with the night sky. We look into the night sky and we see stars. You see other things that start to glow too. You go down to a movie like Finding Nemo and you look all the way down to the lowest levels of the ocean, and in Finding Nemo, when they went that deep, what did they find? They found something glowing, and it turned out to be an anglerfish that had this little nose that was glowing so that they could attract other fish there, and then when they attract other fish there, they were able to eat the fish. Things glow all the time, whether it's fireflies or anglerfish. But there's something else that glows too. It's called dinoflagellates. Dinoflagellates are tiny, tiny, tiny animals that love to glow. In fact, if you live in the South, down near Louisiana, sometimes you can go out at night, and where the Mississippi River empties into the ocean, right at that place you'll find a whole bunch of dinoflagellates sitting there at night glowing bright blue, and you could see it from the sky. We're going to try to look at this though, because I'm reminded how in the Bible it talks about God being the Father of light. And while that is exciting to think about, He's the Father of all the things that we talked about on day 1 of this VBS, it's also exciting to think about that He's the Father of even these dinoflagellates that light up when we shake them around. So let's head to a dark room. Let's see if we can get these things to glow. So we just saw how great that glow was. And just like those bacteria were able to glow inside that little orb and they were able to give off different colors of light, God has created fireflies at night to shine in all different colors. I don't know if you've been outside in July and watched the fireflies as they are sparkling, but you see yellows and greens and blues and all these different colors because God has made these fireflies to glow in different colors. If God has cared so much about the color that these little insects that fly through the air glow in, how much more does He care about the rest of His creation? And He cares also about the other things that are flying through the air, like the fireflies. We see birds that have a variety of feathers. We see things like the peacock. And the peacock, when they stretch out their tail, they have these bright, brilliant feathers that have what look like eyes on them. And they are so beautiful to see and so exciting to see. We see other birds that fly with plumes like this, ones that are spotted. We see ones that are black. We see ones that are white. We see all these different colors. Now I want to give you something else exciting that you can do at home. So in your VBS packet that you got to bring home, if you haven't already done it, because I know it's tempting, we've already done ours at home, you've got this nature print package. It's a little piece of paper that when you take it out in the sun and you put it down and put something on top of it, whatever the sun hits is going to change one color, but whatever is on top of that paper is going to change it a different color. And so you can go out and try to find feathers in your yard that birds have dropped, put them on that paper, sit it in the sun, and see what the feather looks like. Another fun thing you can do is if you have a magnifying glass and you go home and you take one of these feathers, try to look really close at it and see that God has not just made a feather to look nice and fuzzy and fluffy, but He's actually made it to look even fuzzier and fluffier when you get down and look at the individual little pieces of the feather. Because God has been so good at what He's done, and He's designed this with such detail that it is perfect for what a bird is meant to do. Now I want to try something with you. I've got an egg shaker here. If I take this egg shaker and drop it, it's going to hit the table. I've also got a feather. If I drop this feather, what do you think is going to happen? It also is going to hit the table. Now, which one do you think is going to hit the table faster? The egg shaker or the feather? I'm guessing most of you are saying the egg shaker because it's heavier, right? And because it's being pulled to the ground and gravity is pulling it. So let's see what happens and let's make sure that you're right. So we're going to set them up here and we're going to drop them. 3, 2, 1. The egg definitely hit first. But I want to ask you something. Do you think the egg hit first because it's heavier? Or do you think it hit first because this feather has all these little plumes and all these little pieces on it that catch a lot of air as it's falling? Have you ever held your hand out the window when you're riding in a car and you felt the air pushing on your hand and pushing it back, and then if you tilt your hand a little bit, it feels like it's pushing it up? That's the air moving on your hand. And as more air pushes on your hand, it forces it to go higher and higher. And so when we look at an egg like this, it's kind of rounded on the bottom. When it falls through the air, all the air moves around it, and there's not a whole lot of air that touches it. But when we have a feather like this, that has all of these small pieces, and all of these small pieces have little small pieces attached to that, and those little small pieces have small pieces attached to that. When it falls, it moves through the air, and it catches all of that air as it goes down. And that air helps to hold it up. See, there is actually some science that's been done with this. people have actually taken heavier objects like an egg and feathers, and they have made what's called a vacuum. A vacuum is where they take an enclosure and they take all of the air out of it so that there is nothing inside. There's no air, there's nothing else inside whatsoever. And they have taken a feather and they have taken eggs and they have dropped them to see what would happen. And do you know what happens then? They hit the ground at the exact same time. Even though this catches more air, when you put it in a place where there is no air and you drop them at the same time, they hit. Because the only reason that this feather, when I drop it, moves around is because the air in this room is moving. Even just slightly so, it causes this feather to move around and around and around. As the air catches this and moves it, we see that God has designed these feathers perfectly to be on birds, because remember, what do birds do? They fly through the air. And so in order to fly through the air, they have to be really light. And these feathers are light. If you pick up a feather, it weighs hardly anything. But they are hollow inside, and each one of these little plumes is hollow inside, so that it weighs almost nothing. But it is still big enough to catch air as it flies through the air. Because just like when you stick your hand out the window when you're driving in your car and it pushes up, as the air hits a feather, it's also pushing on that. And think how many feathers birds have. It consistently pushes up and up and up, so that when a bird flaps its wings, it pushes all that air down and moves himself even higher. We're going to go try something else in the gymnasium now to see how air pressure really works. All right, so we saw upstairs the differences with these feathers, and we saw how the feathers move, and we thought about how we hold our hands outside the window when we're driving in a car, and it makes our hand go up because the air is catching our hands and moving it up, just like an air catches a feather and helps a bird to fly. This is hard to see, though, with just a small feather like this. So we wanted to show you something a little, well, bigger. And so because the church staff here at Coram Deo loves you kids, we wanted to get people out here with a parachute. And what we want to show you now is as they go up and down, you're going to see the parachute move up. But as soon as they pull their hands down, it doesn't come down that fast because the air is still going to hold it up. And you're going to see what happens after the air holds it up for just a couple seconds. All right, girls, run under. That was pretty cool, wasn't it? Seeing that parachute go up and down and seeing how high it can go, and then it takes so long to come back down that we can actually have people run underneath it and come out to the outside and be able to grab where they were at without the parachute really even touching them, or getting close to touching them at least. That is so awesome to see. And what it reminds me when I look at it is it reminds me that when we look at feathers like this, God has designed feathers and birds to do what He intended. He created on the fifth day birds to fly in the air, and He gave them feathers that were specifically designed so that they could fly in the air. See, He didn't create us as humans to be able to soar in the air with wings. He didn't create us as humans to go into the ocean and swim without having to take a breath. See, God has created things that are in the oceans, in the seas, and the waters, and things that are in the sky that are perfectly designed for where they're at. He's created these birds to fly in these places. He's created whales to live under the water and come up every so often for a breath, for fish to have gills to catch the water. And so here's what it reminds me of. It reminds me that when we look at God's creation, when we go out and we can take our bug catching kit that we have in our VBS packets, when we go out and grab things out of the water or bugs that we find crawling around, we see that God has designed everything to work perfectly with the way it is. God doesn't just love His creation, but He cares so much about it that He put detail into it. Every stripe on every fish was put there by God for a reason. Some of them are camouflage so that the predators can't see them when they're swimming through the water. Some of the birds fly so fast to be able to catch mice that are on the ground from a mile away. They can see it and they know to swoop in. God has designed everything perfectly with the detail that it needs because God cares about the details of His creation. And as you can tell, as we've been going through these past couple weeks, is that everything is starting to build up, right? You can feel it, and I can feel it, and you can tell that I'm getting more excited about this. Because first God creates light, and then he creates the waters, and then he creates the plants, and then he creates the sun and the stars, and now we see he's creating things that are flowing and swimming in the rivers and the oceans and the seas, and we see that he's created things that are flying across the sky, and it is building up to the day when he creates man in his own image. When man and woman are created, and they are the one that God says, this is very good. And we are excited to see that. It is coming next week when we get to take a look at how God created animals, but then he also created man and woman in his own image. Next week is the crown jewel of God's creation, when he creates people, a people for himself. We are excited for that, and we are looking forward to next week when you can conclude this little bit strange vacation Bible school. We've had fun. We hope you're continuing to have fun. Get outside and see what you can catch.